welcome back to another story time with GamGam. And I hope that you've been enjoying the stories about Winnie the Pooh's bedtime stories. Last time we had the story from Piglet, from a story that Pooh had told Piglet about Piglet becoming a knight. And this time we're going to hear from Owl, the wise owl. Let's see what he has to tell us today. Maybe this one will make Pooh tired. Owl's well that ends well. It was the time of year that the inhabitants of the 100-acre wood called fall, because that is when the leaves on the trees decided to do just that. Transforming to green to all those bright autumn tints and hues was obviously quite exhausting. So before the cold of winter arrived to redden the ends of noses and tickle toes, no matter how warmly cradled in sensible boots and stockings, so woolly that a pasture full of them would make a shepherd look twice, the leaves would drift drowsily down to sleep away the season under the blankets of snow that would soon be arriving. Making sure the leaves were arranged properly for their long winter's nap was a responsibility Winnie the Pooh and his neighbors took very seriously, or as seriously as a bear of very little brain could take anything that didn't involve eating. Owl was most helpful on these occasions because his bird's eye view enabled the others to take the leaves neatly into convenient piles in out-of-the-way spots throughout the forest, places where they wouldn't be tripped over by unwary travelers, but where they were easily available to anyone who felt like a good jump into a pile of leaves. As the friends gathered, rakes at the ready, beneath the last tree in the wood, where one last leaf clung uncertainly to an uppermost branch, Owl flew up to encourage the struggler to let go and convince him that all would be well. Owl is certainly a wonderful bird to have around, said Piglet, thinking how nice it was to have that such a care was being taken with such a very small leaf. Yes, agreed Rabbit. It makes you wonder how he manages to put up with all the loneliness. Is Owl lonely? Pooh wanted to know. Would you be if all the other birds in the wood were flying south for the winter except you? Answered Rabbit. Well, there are no other Tiggers in the wood, and I'm not lonely, Tigger pointed out. In case you haven't noticed, Eeyore rumbled, you're not a bird. Oh, yeah, said Tigger. I forgot. And no wonder, whistled Gopher. With all that bouncing you do, you'd spend more time with your head in the clouds than Owl does. Than Owl does? Owl asked as he drifted to earth next to the last floating leaf, which Piglet recovered and tenderly put in its place. Am I not doing something? You're not flying south for the winter, Rabbit informed him. Of course not, huffed Owl, puffing out his chest in what he hoped was a very dignified manner. I never go anywhere without an invitation. But you're a bird, Tigger reminded him, and I'm not. Owl gave Tigger a very long look down his beak. I am very well aware, Owl replied at last, of at least one of those facts. Probably both. What Tigger is trying to say, said Rabbit, is that you have been invited. Indeed, exclaimed Owl, his already wide-opened eyes opened even wider in surprise. By whom? No, not by whom, corrected Pooh. By Mother Nature. I don't believe I know the lady, Owl answered thoughtfully. She's the one who says if you're early enough to catch the worm, Gopher reminded him. Yes, said Owl. That's very true, but I could never see much use in spending a great deal of time in the company of worms, especially first thing in the morning. She also says that we should give you a hand, Eeyore interjected, because you're worth 2 birds in the bush. At that, all Owl's neighbors broke into a spontaneous round of enthusiastic applause. Owl acknowledged the ovation with quick, embarrassed bows of his head. Obviously, Owl said when the clapping was over, this is a lady of quality who knows what she's talking about. South for the winter it is. In no time at all, Owl had shaken hands with all his friends and bidden them a fond farewell. Then, after finding the most suitable limb for a dignified but dramatic takeoff, he spread his wings and launched himself majestically into the sky. Pooh and the others waved and cheered and shouted goodbyes until Owl disappeared from sight. "Well," Rabbit said with a sigh, "now he won't be lonely anymore." "Yes," said Pooh slowly, "but what about us?" "What about us?" Rabbit repeated, confused. "Aren't we going to be lonely without Owl?" clarified Piglet. "Shucks," sniffled Tigger, "I miss the old feather duster already." "Me too," said Gopher. "That wise old bird and I had a lot in common." "Like what?" demanded Rabbit. "Trees! That's what," Gopher snapped back. "Sure, he liked the tops while I found the roots positively fascinating. But a tree's a tree, and nothing else." Gopher shook his finger in Rabbit's face for added emphasis. "I miss him too," grumbled Eeyore, in case anyone's interested. Pooh leaned close to Rabbit and spoke quietly into his ear. "You miss him too, don't you, Rabbit?" "Of course I do," answered Rabbit sadly, "but this is for his own good, isn't it?" Pooh looked very thoughtful. He knew this for a fact because he could feel that his face was all scrunched up and crinkly. "Doesn't Mrs. Nature," he said at last, "mention something about birds wearing the same suits?" "Birds of a feather flock together," quoted Rabbit. "What about it?" "Perhaps we miss flocking with Owl," suggested Piglet. "But we don't have feathers," Rabbit pointed out. "Not on the outside," said Pooh, "but I think we do all on the inside. That's what tickles us so when we're all together." Rabbit looked around at all of his sad-faced friends. "What are you going to do about it, Pooh?" he asked, a twinge of desperation in his voice. Pooh quietly took Rabbit's paw into his own. "Don't worry, Rabbit," he said with a smile. "Mrs. Nature knows all about feathers and flocking and being together." Pooh scratched his head. "All we have to do is figure out exactly what she means." Meanwhile, somewhere deep in the 100-acre wood, Owl was perched, thoughtful on a stump. "South," he repeated to himself for the 100th time. "The sun sets in the west and rises in the east." Owl looked up at the sun. It was noon, so the yellow orb was hanging right in the middle of the sky. "That's no help," muttered Owl. He thought some more, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Moss grows on the north side of a tree," quoted Owl. He looked around and sighed. Now, if I only knew which tree they were referring to. He sat and he thought some more. All at once, his eyes opened wide with delight. He breathed a sigh of relief. "If I'm supposed to fly south," he reasoned, "Mother Nature will obviously let me know if I'm going in the wrong direction." Reassured, he lifted off into the sky once more, soaring over the 100-acre wood. Owl reveled in the view of his home. He was beginning to feel very sad at leaving it, when suddenly, in the clearing far below, he saw a very strange sight. "This bear investigating," he said to himself, swooping down for a closer look. Landing in the clearing, Owl discovered a group of birds of various sizes, all wearing what looked to be feathers, bearing a marked resemblance to his own. They were all also wearing very pinched expressions on their faces. "Excuse me," said Owl as politely as he could, "but are you in pain?" "No," said one of the birds with a chuckle that sounded very much like Pooh's. "We're just looking wise." "Is this south?" Owl wanted to know. "If it is, it looks very much like home." "It is home, Owl," said a particular long-eared bird. "Welcome back. Is that you, Rabbit? And Pooh? Tigger, why are you all dressed up in feathers?" Owl asked in amazement. "Well, Pooh was sure Mother Nature knew where you belonged," explained Piglet, "and she mentioned feathers and flocking, and so here we are." "Well, it's most thoughtful of you all, I'm sure," Owl told them. I'm very glad to be back. I must admit to missing you all very much." "We missed you too, Owl," cried Tigger, bouncing in an excited circle and sending his not very well attached feathers flying everywhere. "As far as we're concerned," Rabbit told Owl, "you'll never have to fly south again." "No," agreed Owl. "If nothing else, it would be a total waste of time. Flying south is what brought me right back here." "Of course it did," exclaimed Pooh. "This is where Mother Nature knew you should be." And he added with a wide smile, "Everyone knows Mother Nature always knows best." "The trouble is, you see," said Pooh with as much exasperation as is possible for a Pooh Bear to exasperate, which is a very small amount indeed, "that I like all these stories too much for them to put me to sleep." "Then I know exactly who you should be speaking to next," hooted Owl. "Who?" Pooh hooted back. "I need a story that's going to put me to sleep," said Pooh. Gopher scratched his head with the tiny pick he was using to put the finishing touches on a new tunnel. "Well," he said, when the itch had disappeared, "most of the things I like to do are pretty exhausting. Could be listening to my storytelling. It's just as strenuous." Pooh put on one of Gopher's extra mining helmets and sat down on a boulder with just the right amount of roundness to make sitting satisfying. "I'm ready, Gopher." So next time we're going to read Gopher's Day Off. That's his story. Maybe this one will be strenuous and tiring and finally put Winnie the Pooh to sleep so he can get some rest and have some breakfast. After all, you can't have breakfast if you didn't have sleep, right? We'll find out more next time. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you listening to these stories with me. Have a great day. I love you.